Okay, wonderful to have everybody with us this afternoon, and especially our speaker, Professor John Wilkins. So delighted to welcome you all to our second Belfast Summer School lecture of 2026. Professor Wilkins is Professor Emeritus at the University of Exeter. He's joining us today from Edinburgh. He lives in Edinburgh. So we're all over the place today. It's wonderful. We're joining from all the continents. Um, John did his PhD on Aristophanes from Cambridge, and then about 25 years ago, he moved from comedy to looking at food. Isn't that right? That's what you told me. And his research focuses on the history of food and medicine in Greco-Roman culture. His current interests are comic drama and medicine, especially nutrition. John works on the Deipnosophistae. If anyone has ever seen the beautiful little lobes by Athenaeus, Deipnosophistae, that's the philosophers at dinner, and it's what they talk about over dinner. He also works on Galen, and today he's going to talk to us about eating and drinking in the Greco-Roman world. So, John, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good.
I hope you can see the screen. Um, I'm just trying to maximize it.
You have a little play button there. There you go.
There we are.
Wonderful.
Right. Um, ah, no. It's stopping me moving on, Helen. Why is it doing that? Um,
Okay. What are you using the arrows
I am using the arrows.
and nothing's happening? Okay. Would you like me to have a go at sharing?
I think we'd better.
Okay. All right. So if you can stop sharing, I'll open this up.
Um, well, that's annoying. It worked just now. Um,
Just bear with me. Slideshow.
um, I've lost my.
I will. Yeah. Okay. You're okay. I'm gonna sort this out right now. Um, there we go.
Great. Very good. Um, Sorry about that, everybody. Good afternoon again. Um, I didn't know what you wanted to hear about this afternoon. So I'm going to talk about some aspects of Greek and Roman food that interest me. And then if you send messages to the chat or ask questions afterwards, we can realign to what I should have said from your point of view. So we'll try and match up that way. And I thought I'd start with some myths that Roman people told themselves and some myths that Greek people told themselves about their food. And some of you will know that there's a kind of ideal Republican meal in the Roman world. Um, People didn't eat any fish. They identified themselves as a pastoral people. They didn't eat wheat, but they ate emmer, a primitive wheat. They ate beans and they ate pork preserved as bacon. Um, you can find this in Ovid's Fasti, for example, in lots of places. This is tradition. This is traditional Roman eating, as people imagined it, mostly during the imperial period. They were looking back. So what they actually ate is would be something quite different. As you might imagine, what you eat depends on your status, on your class, on how many resources you have. Do you have any choice in what you eat? All of that is left out in this myth making. If people were very wealthy, they were part of a kind of international jet set and ate like people did in the older empires of Assyria and Babylon and Egypt. But the Romans believed that they had no luxury in this early period, no fancy eating whatsoever. And it's something which particularly arose with Augustus and after Augustus. Um, and there was an ideology that we are simple eaters, even though we're running this world empire. We're emperors. But if you read Suetonius' Life of Augustus, he's a very simple eater. And quite a lot of people from the time of Cato the Elder in the second century AD criticized this luxury coming into the Republic and into the empire, and blamed it on foreigners. And you find this particularly in Roman satire. Horace likes to idealize his farm in the Tiber Valley, where he can eat much more simply than he does when he's in town with Maecenas and all those rich guys. And there's a wonderful story in Ovid Metamorphoses, Book 8, the story of Philemon and Baucis, two poor people who receive the gods, Jupiter and Mercury, without realizing it. But they are such honest working folk that they give the gods simple foods. And the gods really love their honesty and simplicity. And when the flood comes, all the rich people are flooded. Philemon and Baucis are made into semi demigods. So this is ideal myth making. If you're a Roman person in and writing a text in, say, 10 AD, if we compare that with Greece, the Greeks like to think of themselves as a poor country, living in a very mountainous place, as of course the Greek mainland is. The enormous contrast with the luxury of the Persians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians in their grand old cities. But of course, a lot of Greek cities existed in Asia Minor, places like Miletus and Ephesus, and did live in considerable sophistication. But the Greeks still had this idea that we eat simple mountain food. They also had an ideology which the Romans shared, that wealth from agriculture is better than wealth from trade. So if you grow something yourself, especially if you are self-sufficient, this is part of simple virtue. It's rather like the Roman version. But as you know, the Greeks were very powerful myth makers, and they had myths about where their food came from. So Dionysus had brought the vine and other green plants from Asia. He had brought these plants to Greece and planted them in Greece and made the vine and wine as important as it was in the historical period. Similarly, Demeter brought cereals from the Near East. And you could link that myth of the goddess bringing cereals with the development of cultivated plants in the Fertile Crescent if you wanted to link archaeology and anthropology with Greek myth making. So myth making, as usual, is true in a kind of way. And I've mentioned Prometheus as well. You remember he is the god who brings fire to human beings. And human beings are punished. They're not allowed. This is in Hesiod's two poems, The Works and Days and the Theogony. Prometheus is a friend of human beings, uses really angry and punishes men. Men are not allowed to live with the gods anymore. And as a punishment, Pandora is invented, and men have to live with women after this unfortunate event. So it's what you might call an early misogynistic myth. But cooking, sacrifice, fire are mixed up uh, all together in the myth of Prometheus. So what we have, aside from these myths, we might say, is a Mediterranean style of eating, where the key identifying plants are the vine, cereals like wheat and barley, olive oil. You may have been to see the Odyssey, that came out last week. Um, and the idea of Homer's version of the Odyssey, at least, is that Odysseus wants to get back to Greece where people use olive oil, they drink wines, and they eat cereals. All the people that he meets in his wanderings don't eat Greek food. They're lotus eaters in the land of the lotus eaters. Um, um, Circe changes his companions into pigs. Calypso wants to give him nectar and make him into a god. The Cyclops is eats human beings. All these people eat weird food. He just wants to get home, and when the Phaeacians take him home, they put him under an olive tree to link him with the plant and with his protector, Athena. And these plants, which are so important in Greek and Roman thinking, um, uh, and in throughout literature, are also, of course, the Mediterranean triad, which the World Health Organization said was should form the most healthy diet for human beings. Beyond the Mediterranean, it's a Mediterranean diet. So you eat cereals, you eat beans, you don't eat much meat. And the Greeks and Romans, unless they were very wealthy, did not eat much meat. And when they did, the animal was most probably sacrificed. And the myth of Prometheus explains why Greek people sacrificed animals as they did. We might pick that up later if you want to. The Romans, for their part, were very good at developing new plants. All sorts of fruits came in from Asia. I've mentioned here apples, apricots, and peaches. And some foods came from much further east. The citron was more or less the only citrus food that the Greeks and Romans had. They may possibly have had lemons, that's not so clear. But they also had chicken. You may know that the chicken originates in the forests of Myanmar and Thailand, and it gradually made its way through Central Asia to Greece and the Black Sea in about the 8th century BC, the 8th century BC, but it wasn't commonly eaten. It was not until quite a long time into the Roman period it was called the bird that we eat. Before that, it was just a bird to compare with pheasants and other birds. Um, so this Mediterranean system, it had its plants and foods native to the Mediterranean area, broadly defined, including the Black Sea, and then it had these introductions from Asia. Rice was known to Theophrastus, the Greek botanist. Aubergines were probably not known. Bananas might have been known. They might be referred to by Theophrastus. But we know that some things, which Colombian foods from South America, were not known. So no potatoes or tomatoes in ancient Rome. So going back to my earlier point, what do we want to know? Do we want to know how emperors ate? Suetonius is very good at telling us about various successes from some emperors. Domitian is quite a notorious example. Caligula. I mentioned the very austere eating of Augustus, except on state occasions when he really pushed the boat out. But of course, emperors are more or less unique. Until they came to have two emperors, there's only one of them. So emperors, in my opinion, are not very interesting. Um, uh, so my focus is much more on the whole population, rich and poor alike. But if you want more emperor stuff, we can do that later. Are we talking about everybody, men, women, and slaves? Our sources are much more keen to tell us about what men did. Women's lives were more private, away from the public sphere. So we're not told so much about them, but they were half the population and busy eating every day. So we might want to know about that. There was a large slave population, especially in the Roman period. What did they eat? All of these things that might be what we want to know. Um, and I've mentioned here Peter Garnsey, who's a wonderful ancient historian and Australian. who got really angry with Greek doctors because of the state of malnutrition um, in the imperial period. We know that there was malnutrition most years for quite a lot of the population because food ran out at the end of the winter in country areas. And until new crops came in June, July kind of time, the spring was hungry months throughout the Mediterranean. In general, the Mediterranean is not very productive of food. If you think of uh, big Italian or Greek cities in the world, Melbourne has got an awful lot of Greeks. New York's got Pennsylvania got an awful lot of Italians. That's because Greece and Italy are not very good um, climates and landscapes for feeding people. People went hungry, and the same in the ancient world. And Peter Garnsey said that women suffered particularly, and he's the evidence comes largely from bones and skulls, and you can tell malnutrition partly from lesions around the eye sockets. Uh, and the idea was that if a woman was pregnant, she had an awful lot of blood in her body, and this was unbalancing her humoral system, and she needed to eat less. And you'll be aware that that is not that is not standard medical advice for pregnant women now. They're feeding for two, obviously. Peter Gans is also very critical about the circumstances and ignorance of ancient doctors in delivering babies. And there's a very high mortality rate around that. Um, and I mention his fury because he's deeply critical of ancient doctors and their advice on nutrition. But if you think about it, the NHS is in the UK at least, National Health Service is not perfect. And you could criticize it in similar ways, I think. So there are interesting ways. And again, this question, what do we want to know? Some sources are much better than others in um, their interest in food. There's a lot of eating and drinking in the Iliad and Odyssey, not so much in the Aeneid. Greek and Roman comedy has a huge amount. That's where food is most discussed. And most of that survives, apart from the plays of Aristophanes, which are in manuscripts. Most of Greek comedy survives in the books of Athenaeus that Helen mentioned earlier, which have endless quotations from comedy about how they cook things and what foods there were and what pots and pans they had and that sort of thing. Roman satire is also very good. Juvenal, wonderful book by Emily Gowers from 1993, The Loaded Table. Food doesn't belong to grand literature, she says. It belongs to martial, to epigram, it belongs to satire, it belongs to comedy. I think she's mistaken. As I said, there's a huge amount of eating in Homer, a grand epic genre, a great deal of sacrifice of animals. We can come back to that if you want to. By far the best source is ancient medicine, the Hippocratic writers and Galen, who wrote hundreds of pages on nutrition, how plants grow. And I mention Cato the Elder here because you could oppose the apparently luxurious Galen, who was physician to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the second century AD. You could contrast him with Cato, who hated all things Greek and thought that the Romans should not be influenced by the Greeks in the second century BC. But Galen and Cato agree that cabbage is one of the superfoods of the ancient world. It had many nutritional qualities, it had many what we now call pharmacological properties. So there are interesting agreements and contrasts in these sources. I'll come on shortly to the Herculaneum sewer and the archaeology of that. From 79 AD, obviously the explosion of Vesuvius that overcame Herculaneum and Pompeii, Asua has preserved a lot of um, coprolites from a group of flats in the town, and we can see what ordinary people ate. It's very striking. And a final thing I thought I'd put in from a UK point of view is the Vindolanda tablets up in near Hadrian's Wall in England, the English-Scottish border. A number of birchwood tablets were preserved in bogs there. And there's all sorts of interesting things. There's people writing letters home to Syria and Egypt. These are Roman soldiers, desperate to have some of their usual food to complement the sort of stuff they had to eat in ancient Northumberland. There's also a tablet, a birthday invitation that a woman called Sulpicia sends to her female friends. So there's a possibility to reconstruct a birthday party in ancient Britain in second century AD, I think the tablets are from. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time with Galen. He's a particularly good source. Um, and again, that's my choice, which you might want to rectify. Um, the image you have here is a particularly beautiful image, one of about 150 in a Latin translation of Galen from the French court in about 1480. It's now in Dresden, but it's got a large number of miniature illustrations. And here you can see Galen. He's wearing a very natty hood, which is a version of what a university teacher looked like in the 15th century. So he is dressed like a medical lecturer in Paris University, and he's advising his assistants on what plants to pick for um, his big treatise called Simple Medicines, where he describes all the drugs. And you might think, why are we talking about drugs when we want to talk about food? Well, Galen wrote a long treatise in 3 books on the powers of foods in about 180 AD. And the treatise depends on his work on drugs. And his definition of a food is something which maintains your body in a constant state, and a drug changes it. There's this key distinction between a food and a drug, because normally a food and a drug, well, garlic is an example of what he thought of as a very powerful drug with no food value in it. So it's more of a drug than a food. Onions and all the other alliums the same, because there was no trophère in it in garlic. It couldn't replace energy. There's no calories, as we'd say in the modern world. It has all sorts of other properties, but Galen called these drug properties. They weren't food properties. So we like to put proteins, minerals, vitamins, all within the food category. Galen didn't do that. It was only the calories or his equivalent. Therefore, foods have many pharmacological properties. And most fruits and vegetables, in Galen's view, don't have any food value. They don't give you many calories because he didn't have potatoes, of course, but they do have other qualities and can help you rebalance your body. The books on the powers of food is in 3 books. You can see cereals, beans, and pulses, the most nutritious things, then the fruits and vegetables, and then animals, birds, and fish in book 3. Very briefly, this is a scientific text in terms of ancient science. Galen explains in Simple Medicines why foods have the effect on the body that they do. And it's based in physics. The cosmos has 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Human beings operate at a lower level than the cosmos, and they have qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. Your body is made up of those 4 things. Those are the primary qualities. your blood is wet, your bones are dry, kind of thing. And there are secondary qualities, particularly flavors in foods, and the flavors will help you to see what effect the food is having on your body. So if you think, for example, of eating an unripe apple, it's really sour and it puckers up your mouth. It's astringent. And Galen thinks it does the same thing inside you when you've eaten it. It's going to contract the channels of the body. And he's very interested in the substance and matter of food, ousia in Greek, because, of course, when you eat a piece of bread, for example, somehow your body transforms that into blood. Now, Galen's explanation of how that happens is rather different from what a modern medical scientist would say. He uses the notion of whole substance. There's been a big change over two stages from the bread to blood. But once it's been transferred into blood, the body can deposit the food eventually where it's needed. So it might develop a bit of bone marrow, it might develop some nerve ends in your body. But there's a limit to how much science that doctors need, Galen says. So he leaves most of that to the natural philosophers, people like Aristotle. Um, and um, uh, he, so we don't have to go too far in this uh, matter of physics, but he does want to say how food works. Uh, and he does it in a scientific way with research. He travels all over the place, talks to people, tries all sorts of different foods. He tests the food rigorously. He tries things on himself and on patients. He observes, and he has a formal demonstration to show with a formal proof that this is the effect of carrot or this is the effect of wheat, whatever it might be. So it's a scientific system. It's really quite striking. And Galen's system stayed in place for about 1500 years in Europe and in the Near East in Arabic until the 17th century and a bit later. So it's a sustainable system of science. Now, he makes several really interesting statements in this treatise on the powers of food. He's talking about the diet that people ate. So it's not what he thinks they ought to eat, the advice you get from your doctor when you go to the general practitioner. If people eat it, he's going to describe it, and we'll see one or two interesting examples. Um, he's very interested in where the plants, for example, or where the fish come from. Do the fish come from polluted waters or clear waters, the deep sea? Do plants come from orchards and gardens, or are they wild plants? Do the animals come from farms or from the mountains? In all of these cases, the food will be different. So provenance is really important to him, just as now local foods have become quite important. We want to know how the food has been grown or how the animal has been raised. And also the food has to be correctly processed. Wheat is best, says Galen, but if you eat bread that isn't properly cooked, that's going to do you some harm. It'd be very hard for you to digest. So wheat isn't necessarily the best if you live in a place with infertile or thin soil, what I've called here the microclimate, which characterizes the Greek mainland pretty extensively. Or if you're in Italy, if you're up in the Apennines, it's very different from being down in a rich plain like the Po Valley. Um, so you need to have the food that's appropriate to where you live. So that might be a primitive wheat like the emmer wheat I mentioned earlier, or rye even. I mentioned that fruits and vegetables have a pharmacological effect and not much nutrition, but they can do, the pharmacological effects can do good things for you. Lettuce is good for the development of blood, for example. Gourds and fruit are good for the bowels to help food move through your intestines. Um, we can come back to that if you want to. Now, Galen has some interesting opinions on the edible snail. There is one for your consideration. He's talking about Egyptians. This is a really interesting passage. It's quite clear that we should count this animal among neither the winged nor the aquatic creatures. So it's not a fish and it's not a bird, he says. But if we do not include it among terrestrial animals either, we shall be saying absolutely nothing about the food from it. Nor again, so okay, fair enough. He's trying to categorize it. Is it a fish? Is it a bird? Well, it's a sort of terrestrial animal. Nor again is it sensible to ignore it as we would ignore woodworms, vipers, and other reptiles that they eat in Egypt and some other countries. So people in Egypt eat weird things. He means native Egyptians, not the incoming Greeks ruled by the Ptolemies who ate in a Greek style, but Egyptian people not operating in a Greek context. For none of these people will read this, and we ourselves would never eat any of what to them are foods. So Galen has no intention of eating woodworms or vipers. The Egyptians are not going to read anything in Greek, so they are completely different cultures. They're separate cultures. We're not going to concern ourselves with Egyptians or their strange foods, though he does have foods from Egypt, in fact. And then he says at the end, but all Greeks eat snails on a daily basis. That's a very interesting piece of evidence. I've seen Greek people in Crete at Easter collecting snails on an archaeological site. But when he says on a daily basis, Greece is a hot country, as Italy is. Obviously, the snails are only there after rain. And given these apparent Egyptian prejudices that Galen seems to have, I say at the bottom, do note that he trained in Alexandria. That was a big medical center, but those were Greek-speaking people in Ptolemaic Egypt. So he's concerned with classification and what sort of people he's talking about. Now, he was the physician to Marcus Aurelius, so he was a big shot living an elite life in Rome. But he was very interested in observing what working people did and how they managed to eat their food. And this is quite an important passage, talking about them eating cereals. Um, uh, uh, so the thing is that these people would be eating bread with cheese on it, which Galen doesn't think is a good idea at all. And they're desperately hungry after a day harvesting or digging ditches. And so he says their depleted flesh snatches up from the stomach, not only half concocted, but even when they work after a meal, sometimes absolutely unconcocted juices. So the body hasn't been able to break down this food. It's more or less raw food, which Galen thinks is a very bad idea. This is why these people later suffer very troublesome illnesses and die before their old age. Sorry about that. Ignorant of this, most people who see them eating and concocting what none of us can tackle, that is, us wealthy people, but none of us can tackle and concoct, congratulate them on their bodily strength. Also, since very deep sleep occurs in those who undertake much hard labor, and this helps them with concoction to a greater degree, they are consequently less injured by harmful foods. So they eat too quickly, they eat unsuitable foods, but if they sleep well, they'll be okay. But, says Galen, if you were to force them to stay awake for more nights in succession, they would immediately become ill. Interesting observations about the working man. Now, Galen has another passage. Again, in all these cases, he's trying to look at evidence. And he's interested in country people because they work really hard, unlike the leisured classes in Rome. And this is just a summary. It's not what he actually says. It's quite a long passage. But he recalls a time when he was walking with two young friends from Pergamum, where he was born, in Asia Minor. They were in the fields when they felt hungry, came upon some country people who'd eaten all their bread. So the country people had had their lunch, and the women who were there were about to bake some more, but in the short term, boiled wheat in a pot, seasoned it, and gave it to the city boys to eat. That's Galen and his young friends. They were really hungry. They ate it with gusto and felt a heaviness in the stomach. They lost their appetite. They had indigestion, wind, headache, and blurred vision. It did them much harm. So Galen says to these country people, "Do you eat this stuff?" And they said, "Yes, we do when we're hungry, and we find it indigestible just like you do. But when we're forced to eat it, we eat it." In other words, country people don't always eat, they don't have a choice of what to eat. They're very hungry, so they eat this wheat porridge, which has these effects. You can't always choose what you eat unless you have sufficient resources, is the point of all this. But it allows Galen to see what the effects of eating wheat porridge are. He sees that firsthand when he does it. Now, bitter vetch is another one of these agricultural plants which are normally fed to animals, but people sometimes have to eat. Um, so he says, with ourselves and, excuse me, many other countries, cattle eat bitter vetch, which has first been sweetened with water, but people absolutely avoid it. It tastes bad and it produces unhealthy humor in the body. But sometimes in a severe famine, as Hippocrates wrote, this is one of Hippocrates' epidemics, from force of necessity they come to it. So the poor country people have to eat what is normally fed to cattle. We ourselves use bitter vetch with honey as a drug, going back to what I was saying earlier, for getting rid of thick fluids in the chest and lungs, first preparing it as we do lupins. The white ones among them have less pharmacological activity than those that tend more to golden or yellowish. So there are different sorts of bitter vetch. The ones that have been boiled twice and frequently sweetened with water, while they avoid the unpleasant taste, at the same time also do away with the cleansing and cutting properties. They're the pharmacological activity he mentioned before, so that the earthiness of their substance is left behind, which, in the absence of obvious sharpness, becomes a rather drying foodstuff. So it's something a human being only eats in desperation. And he has something similar to say about acorns. Now, I thought you'd like to consider briefly red mullet, a fish quite common in the Mediterranean, much more common in the ancient Eastern Mediterranean, but it was available in Rome at great cost. It was thought of as a luxury, one of those fish that came into Rome. And Galen observes, talking about the red mullet, those foodstuffs that are foreign to the whole natures of the animals being nourished either are not eaten by them at all or are eaten without pleasure. So if the food must be suitable for a human being, or cattle food must be suitable for cattle, is what he means. You want something that is suitable for your kind of body as a human being. Nevertheless, just as the moisture of the proper foods is less nourishing, so it is more easily concocted and distributed. So the complications, things may not be all that nourishing, but it may be more suitable to eat. Therefore, red mullet flesh is tasty, being food proper to the nature of humans. Nor again, so if you're a human being, red mullet is ideal for you to eat. It has a flesh that is very suitable. It's proper to the nature of human. But, says Galen, I can't understand why very many people buy the largest red mullet, which has flesh that is neither tasty like the small ones, nor easily concocted. Now, here he's taking a shot at wealthy people in Rome who wanted to eat big red mullet. A big red mullet is a better mullet, the wealthy people thought. And even better than that, if you can get a head from a big mullet or a liver, that's the best thing of all. That's luxury eating. Galen has no interest in that at all. There's no point in doing that. It's not as good as the smaller ones. And the smaller ones, furthermore, are absolutely ideal eating for a human being. It's the opposite of bitter veg. We come now to that interesting tunnel in Herculaneum. I mentioned it was a sewer. You can walk down it. It's like a Victorian um, drain in a big British city. Uh, it runs under a row of shops and flats. I think there's a baker. There's a um, oh dear, I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the shopkeepers sold, but the evidence is there. And above the shops, there's a row of flats. So these are ordinary working people in Herculaneum. They're not wealthy people like Galen. And all the products of their toilets dried out in this tunnel in under the heat of the volcanic ash um, from Vesuvius blowing up in 79 AD. And this is the work of Erica Rowan, who's an archaeologist now at Royal Holloway University in London. And she's analysed the foodstuffs that are in these coprolites, as archaeologists call them. And there are many different cereals, many fish, many fruits, vegetables, and nuts, 25 different plants. I'll just have a swig of water if you excuse me. The fish here are very interesting because the Romans claim they're not fish eaters. Well, the Romans living around the Bay of Naples were certainly fish eaters. There's about 40 different species of fish and shellfish evidenced in this sewer. Um, and they did eat pigs, like that mythical Roman diet, but also domestic fowls as chicken and sheep. And the really nice thing about the tunnel is that it coincides quite closely with what Galen says. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a ticklish throat here. Galen was writing in about 180 AD. Herculaneum was destroyed in 79 AD, so they're a century apart. But a large number of the fish and plants and nuts and fruits coincide. So Galen is not just some high and mighty person inventing what regular people ate. There is a coincidence between what he says and what the archaeology says. Galen's writing on a very big scale for the whole Roman Empire. It includes Syria and Spain and the Black Sea and Cyrene, places like that. The Hippocratic diets are just based in the Aegean, but he has an imperial scale, as I say. He's not just talking about one place, as Herculaneum is. He's also writing in Greek for Greek readers, which the Roman elite were able to do. So he often has the phrase, the Romans call this, in this case, inula. It's a sort of chicory. And he says, among our people, parhemin in Greek. So our people are people in the area of Mysia in Asia Minor, near from Pergamum, where he grew up. So he talked about the Romans have this word, but our people, so he's thinking of himself in Greek terms. But what he says is quite close to the evidence from Herculaneum. That's really interesting, I think. He's not particularly interested in Rome. He's not particularly interested in Athens. It's also quite striking. He's dismissive of luxury cooking and cookery books, but he himself says that he's planning to write a cookery book about how you cook food properly rather than chefs doing it. And he also thinks, which is interesting for the National Health Service in all countries, is that wine is always beneficial. Uh, Alcohol is not a bad thing in Galen's world, provided you drink it in moderation, of course. Here he is. It's back in the Dresden manuscript, supervising the distribution of wine from a barrel. Beautiful picture of Galen in 1480. What do I conclude from all this? Well, he was a big shot, but he talks to country people. He has a wide purview, even though he was a member of the elite. He does his field work like Dioscorides. He goes to the point of where it's grown and asks the farmers how they grow it and what the effects are. Um, as far as Galen's concerned, a rich person and a poor person, they're a human being with the same body, the same physiological system. So he wants to extend his scientific inquiry to include everybody. It's a scientific method which is based on reason, observation, and testing. And his tests are not double blind, as a modern medical scientist would require. If you have a new drug from GlaxoSmithKline, it's got to be double blind tested. But his testing is repeatable. It has to be repeatable. There's really quite a high level of scientific testing, I think. And lastly, the archaeology supports Galen's claims to a large extent. Well, thank you for your attention. Here's a little reading list, and please fill in anything that I missed out. Thank you for listening.